10 standard firefighting orders were developed to prevent firefighter injuries and fatalities. Each of the first 9 fire orders addresses a particular hazard of the operational fire environment. The 10th order, in many ways, is meant as a culmination of the first 9, and it reads like a mission statement: fight fire aggressively, having provided for safety first. This video opens a discussion around the 10th fire order, and we will hear from Phil Lynn, the base manager of the Boise BLM Smoke Jumpers, and he will share his organization's valuable perspective on fighting fire aggressively and providing for safety first.
I would separate that into 2 elements. One is the tactics, taking aggressive tactics to suppress the fire, having provided for safety. But I tend to think of it more as the strategy of aggressive initial attack. When I relate it to my occupation as a smoke jumper, aggressive initial attack puts us in a position where we can address the risk on a smaller scale, exposing less people, and ideally prevent the fire from growing to a large-scale conflagration, escalating the risk, transferring that risk to a much larger scale. So when I think of fight fire aggressively, that's where I go with that. It is a concept that all fire management officers and firefighters grapple with, and that is the notion that we can't have this absolute zero risk environment. Once we start there, then we can start moving forward to make it as minimal risk as possible. But none of these concepts are unique to smoke jumping. The application of risk management is universal in the wildland fire community. To initiate the risk management process, you have to have that intent. That intent begins with an awareness. And one of the first things any firefighter learns in their S130, 190 courses are situational awareness. So once we, as firefighters, can be aware of our surroundings, then we can identify those hazards. That's really the hardest part of that risk management process, is identifying those hazards. There's certainly plenty out there we can see, they're right in front of us, but there's the ones that we can't see, and that's where you have to have that intent. You have to develop within your organization the tools that'll focus your attention on those blind spots you might have. Once we have those hazards identified, and particularly the ones that we don't normally see or don't anticipate, then implementing mitigations is relatively easy. If we know that this is going to hurt me, I can take actions to prevent that hurt. Just like it says on the form, we have an initial risk, and then we implement the mitigations, and we end up with the residual risk. And then we make a decision about that residual risk, a go, no-go kind of decision. The difficulty is a form like that is great when I'm taking a administrative viewpoint of the activities that we're going to engage in. I have hundreds of risk management worksheets around here about all the different activities we do at the Smoke Jumper organization. And they're great. They're a great tool, and they can show us the proper way to go about business. The challenge is creating that culture within your organization that has that mindset for every decision that they make out there on the fire line. And they don't have the benefit of time to construct something like that. So having been exposed to those administrative tools in the past and absorbed them and implemented them in their non-emergency situations, people tend to make better decisions when they're in the emergency situations, because that formality is part of their internal risk management process. And if we have other great tools, like what we like to use around here is an order of precedence, which kind of, as we develop mitigations, we can see, well, the most effective mitigation is simply maybe not doing that action. Well, that action has to happen, right, so many times in that fire environment. So the next way down the order of precedence might be a design change. All right, we're going to change the piece of equipment I'm using to accomplish this tactic to achieve this suppression goal. And by doing so, it's a safer way of doing it. Maybe that's not achievable. And we finally get down that order of precedence to what we most commonly rely on, and that is training. And that is building our firefighters up with a strong foundation of training that prepares them to develop mitigations to make it safer once they've identified the hazards. That's essentially what training is. It's that preparation. Give them, we like to use that term slides when we're teaching stuff in fire. That's why you do so many practice parachuting jumps, is they have those slides, they've encountered those atmospheric conditions prior to going into an operational environment. When we look at it from the smoke jumper perspective, so oftentimes design brings us back to equipment, and we can eliminate hazards by changing the equipment. Or we can design a new protocol. We can design a new standard operating procedure that eliminates the hazard. But when we start making those movements, then we seem to have, it has more efficacy than just training people to exist in the current environment. We've got that HRO concept of a preoccupation with failure. So we're always needling the standard, how we exist now, and how could it be a little bit better. And maybe, we can always train and train and train, but as we all know, a person's only going to react so well in the circumstances, in the heat of the battle, if you will. If we can go up the chain a little farther and design something or change standard operating procedures, or give them a piece of equipment that's going to make it safe and eliminate the need to train with the current existing piece of equipment, well, we're one step closer to the maximum reduction in that initial risk and minimizing that residual risk. And then, of course, understanding that it is a process, to be diligent and continue to evaluate, to have our supervisors supervising the situation and evaluating it repeatedly, and just getting it into our heads as firefighters, like this process isn't going to end. It isn't going to end today, tomorrow, or it's not going to end after the fire. That's why we have another great tool, the AAR. So that process, that continual process of learning is propagated all the way through the fire, to the end of the fire, and after the fire. I think when young firefighters enter our community, they're taught some very basic concepts. You started this interview discussing the 10 standard firefighting orders, but understanding that you're 25 years in the job, there's still something you need to learn and something you need to improve on your personal risk management process. Developing that culture where people are invested in that and interested in that, as opposed to simply going through the motions so that I can go about my day and get my job done. It's an active process that we need to be invested in, engaged in, create buy-in within your culture. And then you actually see some pretty positive results. You see an organization like ours, which enters what is perceived as a very hazardous way of going about business, but in reality, it's a heck of a lot safer than just riding my bicycle to work, Resilience to me is more like learning from the little mistakes, accepting continual failure, knowing that this is the only way we get better, and we're going to accept this failure, we're going to report it, which is probably the best thing going for this organization that I would share with others, is that reporting culture. The notion that you hide things, sweep them under the rug, is what costs you in the long run. So if you can be empowered by your fire management officers that you report every bad thing that happens that day on your engine, or every bad thing that happens that day on your crew, then everybody can learn from it and accept that accountability is important, but there's not a guillotine hanging over your neck to prevent that sort of reporting culture. You can always find statistics of every single injury that happened in the smoke jumper community. That sort of reporting culture, I think, is what we could pass on the best to the wildland fire.
Understanding that aggressive is both a strategy and a tactic. Having a clear intent to identify the hazards through the risk management process. Using tools like risk management worksheets and orders of precedence to design a safer environment. Continually training and learning as a cultural mindset. Creating resilience through recognition of failure and openly reporting it. These are some valuable insights from a smoke jumper perspective. Now the questions are open to you. What does it mean to fight fire aggressively? And how are you providing for safety first?